Hi, my name is VG. Welcome to Overcoming Church Abuse 5 Steps to Meaningful Change and Healing. In this video, we'll discuss Step 3 Don't Replace Mental Health Care with Church Counseling. If you haven't watched the video on Step 1, Unravel Toxic Theology, and the video on Step 2, Go No Contact with High Control Religion, please watch them first. They will be linked in the description below. In this video, we'll discuss the impact religious trauma can have on mental health, why church or pastoral counseling is not a replacement for mental health care, and tips on how to find the right therapist. So let's get into it. Part 1. The impact religious trauma can have on mental health. When I was a freshman in college, I experienced my first serious episode of depression. During this time, I felt condemned by God. On one hand, I thought a good Christian wouldn't suffer from mental health issues. On the other hand, I thought God was telling me to fast until the depression lifts. So I fasted and I fasted, to the point that it was dangerous. People were congratulating me for the weight loss, but I knew better than to tell anybody what I was really doing. Eventually, I started eating normally again so that I could study and focus on my schoolwork. But I felt tremendous guilt and an overwhelming sense of doom for disobeying what I thought God was telling me to do. After I started eating normally and my mental health improved, I realized that it is not the voice of God that condemns us or tells us to do things that are dangerous or unhealthy for us. Mental health disorders or illnesses affect our thoughts, mood, behavior, and feelings. They can impact our ability to function in school, jobs, family life, relationships, and every other area of our lives. This is why it's so important to prioritize our mental health. Religious church abuse has a profound impact on mental health. It can cause or worsen mental health conditions, as does every form of abuse. However, the impact of religion on mental health has its own unique dynamics. The trauma experienced from church abuse often leads to depression and anxiety. Depression lowers your mood and depletes your energy. It leads to significant impairment in day-to-day life, a loss of interest in activities, and feeling disconnected from relationships. It can make you feel numb, hopeless, and unable to experience joy. It can even lead to ideation of ending oneself. Anxiety involves excessive and persistent fear of day-to-day situations. If you have anxiety, you may feel always on edge, as if something bad is going to happen at any time. It can include anxiety attacks, panic attacks, and phobias. Many churches still teach that if you have real faith in God, you wouldn't feel depressed or anxious. But that's not true. Anything that affects anyone else can affect you also, faith or not. It's like when you fell out of a tree when you were a kid and broke your arm. Your arm didn't break because of a lack of faith, and it wouldn't have healed without a cast. Depression and anxiety are normal human responses to the stress you have endured, not a moral failure. It is not a sin to suffer injury. Survivors of church abuse often experience post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Symptoms of PTSD or CPTSD include intrusive thoughts, nightmares, and flashbacks. It includes negative shifts in thinking and mood, much like depression. It can lead to avoidance and withdrawal. If you suffer from PTSD or CPTSD, you may find yourself always on edge, irritable, or prone to outbursts. Post-traumatic stress is serious and can impact every part of your life. Spiritual practices, though they may be helpful for some, aren't enough to treat this condition. Religious abuse and trauma can also lead to cognitive impairment, memory issues, brain fog, which is a clouding of consciousness, inability to concentrate, low self-esteem, shame, and social isolation, among other life-altering symptoms. Additionally, religious abuse and trauma can lead to mental health conditions like religious psychosis or religious OCD. Religious psychosis is a break from reality where a person's delusions or hallucinations have strong religious themes. It occurs with conditions such as mania, psychotic disorder, or major depression with psychosis. I wish I had understood this when I was a freshman in college, that what I was suffering with was religious psychosis and how treatable it is. I wouldn't have suffered the way I did for as long as I did had I the right information. Religious OCD is a type of obsessive compulsive disorder where a person feels intense anxiety over religious or moral issues. Unwanted or intrusive thoughts lead to compulsive behavior that reduces the anxiety but causes other problems. A person with religious OCD may repeat a religious ritual over and over until it feels right. Live in constant fear of sinning, even to the point of avoiding important events, or obsessively read scripture. I had a relative whose coworker would hide behind her desk to obsessively read her Bible instead of doing her work and would experience intense distress otherwise. It's easy to judge someone who displays this behavior because it is inappropriate, but she was suffering and needed mental health care, not judgment or ridicule. Our brain is an organ in our body where our thoughts are formed, and our thoughts shape our lives. Just as we shouldn't ignore heart problems, a liver condition, or a bone fracture, we shouldn't ignore our mental health either. I'm American, and I understand that accessing any kind of health care in this country has become harder and harder. But in terms of faith, it's no less faithful to access treatment for mental health than it is to take an antibiotic for pneumonia. For survivors of church abuse, it's common that our religious abusers have treated us with judgment or contempt for showing symptoms of mental health struggles. They may perceive it as a moral failure or a personal weakness. It is neither. But internalizing these false beliefs can intensify a victim's trauma and make healing harder. I don't want to disparage anyone's spiritual beliefs or practice. If you have spiritual practices that you find to be beneficial, that's great, so long as they are not used to bypass the urgent role of understanding mental health and seeking help as needed. If you have a pastor or church counselor who you trust and who is not a religious abuser and you find their counseling helpful, there's nothing wrong with that so long as there is an understanding that it is a separate service from mental health care, and so long as the spiritual counseling doesn't oppose, minimize, or override the credibility and importance of mental health care. Arguing and debating with religious abusers doesn't work. All it does is cause us more distress, and receiving church or pastoral counseling doesn't get to the root of mental health issues. This leads us to part two: why church or pastoral counseling is not a replacement for mental health care. For starters, pastoral and church counselors don't have the licensing and expertise of mental health care professionals. They don't have the background, training, or education in psychology. Even when it comes to a therapist or a counselor, you want to find one who specializes in the area that you are seeking help for. For example, if you have trauma, you want to find a provider who is trauma informed. Sometimes we have church counselors who claim to have a background in psychology due to a BA or because psychology was their minor in college. That's not enough. As we discussed in video 1 of the series, our religious beliefs are based on theology, and theology is religious theory. The religious theories that have lasted over time have more to do with the power and affluence of the theologian and those who follow them than anything else. If theologians disagreed, and they always do, the one who wins is quite often the one who is more brutal, elite, or mighty. This is why the religious principles we have been taught often contradict what is found through the scientific process. When I was a kid at the Fundamentalist Baptist Church, I was taught this was proof that the world was against God. But that's not quite so. When it comes to our mental health care, it is important to focus on evidence-based models over relying on religious theory. You wouldn't get knee surgery from your priest, would you? Additionally, quite often, the individuals who provide the church or pastoral counseling are the same folks who caused us religious trauma in the first place. In video 2 of the series, we talked about going no contact with high control religion. We don't heal in the same place where we were harmed. Much of church counseling is focused on keeping church matters within the church, though some matters should be exposed, or providing quick magical fixes, bypassing the real toil and labor required for true inner healing. I can run up for every altar call every Sunday to receive prayer. In fact, I used to. But I was suffering from CPTSD as a result of abuse. The altar calls made me feel good at the time, but that good feeling would fade. Then I would feel like a sinner for not making the progress I desired. I finally learned self awareness and emotional regulation skills through finding the right therapist and reading books written by qualified clinicians. That sped up my progress far more than the hundreds of altar calls I ran up to the front of the church for throughout my life. So much of what we have been taught was sin is a lack of awareness and skills due to trauma. I've had the experience that some of the same preachers and elders who prayed over me at the altar later judged or rebuked me when they felt their prayers didn't work. An endless cycle of failure and repentance keeps us trapped. Learning the psychological roots of our less helpful behaviors and gaining tools to overcome them is the make or break of our lives and futures for those of us who are suffering. That doesn't mean all mental health practitioners necessarily agree either, and that there aren't prejudices in the field of psychology. There are. Which leads us to part 3, tips on how to find the right therapist. When it comes to finding the right therapist, they have to be licensed to practice in your state. Different practitioners have different specializations. For example, if you're experiencing trauma, you want to find a therapist who is trauma informed. If you were abused by a narcissist, you want to find a therapist who specializes in narcissistic abuse, and so on. If not, it may not be as helpful as you had hoped. Consider what your must haves, nice to haves, and your deal breakers are. For instance, if you want virtual appointments only, look for a therapist who offers that. If you want in person appointments only, look for a therapist who offers that. If you don't care either way or you are flexible in this area, it may not be so important. Or is there a therapeutic approach you prefer? If you're not sure, you can do some research on different therapeutic approaches and choose a provider who offers what piques your interest. EMDR and somatic experiencing are two popular therapeutic approaches for trauma survivors. But there are other effective approaches as well. What's right for you depends on you, and you have a right to change your mind with experience. Is the gender of the provider important to you? Gender can be a trigger for many trauma survivors. For others, it may not matter. If you're a member of one or more marginalized groups, whether it is race, ethnicity, culture, gender, or sexual orientation, finding someone who relates to your experiences can make a significant difference. The field of psychology, just like every other industry, is not without its biases and systemic issues. I have even learned with experience that just because someone looks like me doesn't mean that they aren't affected by the system. So feel emboldened to ask lots of questions. Being of multiple marginalized groups, there were times when I saw a therapist who didn't relate to my experiences. They did their absolute best to understand, but I was spending the majority of my session time that I was paying for explaining rather than receiving therapy. When it comes to Christian therapists, there is a reason why I tread with caution. It's not because I'm against religion, because I'm not. But it's because some Christian clinicians use their degrees and licenses as leverage for credibility while pushing theological beliefs over what has been found through psychological research and study. How much this is true will depend on the individual. So if you prefer a Christian therapist, make sure, again, to ask a lot of questions. Having a provider who understands your religious background can be helpful, but depending on the situation, it may not be necessary. There was a time when I used to believe anything my therapist told me. Over the years, I have learned that therapists are just like anyone else. There are good ones and there are bad ones. And sometimes it's just not a good fit. So if you need to make a change, that's okay too. If you're struggling to pay for therapy, you are not alone. Try looking for clinicians who offer sliding scale options or consider state or city run mental health clinics. There is often a long wait list for these services, and you may not be able to be as choosy. But in my opinion, it's still a better option than not getting help at all. Personally, I also like to read books written by clinicians. If time or concentration is difficult for you, there is always the audio option. And I follow different psychologists on social media. It doesn't replace therapy, but it does help to be more informed. If you're looking for a therapist for the first time, or if you would like to find a therapist that is a better fit for you, there's a free downloadable worksheet on the Surviving Religious Narcissism website that can help you narrow down your choices. You can find it by navigating to survivingreligiousnarcissism.com/course and scrolling down to Module 3. It isn't designed to tell you what you should prefer or who you should receive services from, but to assist you as you make the choice that is right for you. I encourage you to take advantage of this resource. Thank you for watching this video. Please comment your thoughts below. If you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe. That would be helpful to me. Also, please join me for the next video. Step 4. Befriend being disliked and misunderstood. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.